The old saying goes, "Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown." But what about the head that doesn't wear the crown, yet suddenly finds itself burdened with its weight? That's the story we're diving into. A tale of secret illness, palace intrigue, and a seismic shift in the British monarchy, all triggered by a single shocking proclamation. Picture this. London, a city steeped in tradition, wakes to an unsettling silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, but a heavy, expectant hush. At precisely 6 a.m., a sealed envelope guarded like a state secret leaves Buckingham Palace. Its destination? Unknown. Its contents? A mystery that would soon send shockwaves across the globe. Within hours, the tremor hits. Newsrooms erupt in a frenzy. Phones ring off the hook. Anchors, those paragons of composure, stumble over words flashing on their teleprompters. The message is stark, unbelievable. King Charles has issued an emergency proclamation naming Catherine, Princess of Wales, as Queen Regent of Britain. Queen Regent, a title not uttered in generations, dusted off from the history books and thrust into the 21st century. The immediate reaction is disbelief. Is this a hoax? A security breach? But soon confirmation trickles in, first from hushed whispers, then from official channels. The BBC, Sky News, even the foreign press scramble to verify the impossible. It's real. The king has acted decisively and secretly without consulting Parliament, without warning his own people. The palace, usually a hive of activity, clams up tighter than a drum. Courtiers are gagged. Reporters once granted access are now barred. Guards offer stony silence. Longtime aides avoid eye contact. It's as if the entire monarchy has retreated into a bunker, leaving the nation to wonder what cataclysmic event could have triggered such a drastic move. Social media, of course, explodes. Number Queen Regent, number Royal Crisis, number Where is the King trend within minutes. Everyone's a royal expert now, offering their theories, their opinions, their anxieties. Some hail it as a brilliant move, the king preparing his heir for the inevitable. Others whisper of darker conspiracies, illness, betrayal, a power grab from within. Parliament is thrown into chaos. Leaders demand answers. The opposition cries for transparency. But the palace remains a fortress of silence. The longer the silence stretches, the louder the nation's collective heartbeat pounds. By midday, crowds gather outside Buckingham Palace, a sea of anxious faces, camera crews jostling for position. They wait under a leaden sky for a statement that never comes. What does this emergency proclamation mean in a kingdom bound by centuries of protocol? And why is the king's voice absent in this crucial hour? For the people, confusion morphs into unease. For the monarchy, this is more than a mere shift in power. It's a test of survival. This isn't a ceremonial gesture, a symbolic passing of the torch. This is an act born of desperation, forged in urgency, sealed with fear. Something far greater than tradition has forced the king's hand. But what and why now? To understand the proclamation, we have to go behind the polished facade, behind the carefully crafted image of royal stability. We have to delve into the shadows of Buckingham Palace, where a darker urgency had taken root, one that few dared to imagine. In the weeks leading up to the proclamation, something inside Buckingham Palace shifted, subtly at first, then all at once. Those closest to the king began to notice the late-night walks, the closed-door meetings that excluded even his most loyal advisors, the quiet, distant look that lingered in his eyes during public appearances. To the outside world, it appeared to be fatigue, but inside the palace walls, there was talk of something deeper, a growing unease that no one could name aloud. Something or someone had shaken his confidence in his own rule. The whispers began, as they always do, quietly behind velvet curtains and in hushed corridors. But this time they carried weight. Courtiers who had served 3 monarchs spoke of a tension they hadn't felt since the darkest days of Diana's death. Staff reported sleepless nights, drawn curtains, and conversations that ended abruptly when footsteps approached. The king's composure, that signature steadiness he'd carried since his coronation, was crumbling under a weight invisible to the public. It wasn't illness that haunted him then. It was something far more dangerous: doubt. Then came the dossier. No one outside the highest echelon of the palace ever saw it, but those who did never forgot it. A slim, leather-bound file delivered late one evening by a courier whose name remains classified. Inside, it is said, lay the evidence of a constitutional sabotage. of a quiet movement to undermine royal authority through backdoor influence and hidden signatures. The document's contents were shocking enough to send ripples through the royal offices, and while no one would confirm its authenticity, the very existence of the dossier was enough to plunge the monarchy into silent panic. Catherine's role during this time became impossible to ignore. Once seen as the calm figure of unity, she began appearing at late-night briefings, seated beside the king, while senior officials exchanged uneasy glances. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with the atmosphere of fear around her. Some interpreted it as loyalty, others as preparation. But one thing became clear: Catherine wasn't merely a bystander anymore. She was at the heart of whatever decision was being shaped behind those gilded doors. Then came the betrayal. A trusted aide whose name was deliberately withheld from all official records broke the unspoken code of silence. Late one night, an encrypted message reached a journalist's inbox with a single phrase: "Emergency protocol activated." Attached was a redacted memo signed by the king himself. Within hours, the document had vanished from every server, but not before igniting a frenzy of speculation. What could be so grave that the monarch would invoke an emergency clause not used since wartime? Inside the palace, tempers flared. The king convened a confidential council of Catherine, William, and two senior advisors. Eyewitnesses described raised voices, accusations, and a chilling silence that followed William's question: "Is this about the crown or about you?" The king didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was written on his face. He was being forced to choose between protecting the monarchy and preserving the fragments of his legacy. By dawn, his decision had been made. The wheels were set in motion for what the world would soon know as the emergency proclamation. But within those walls, something far more human had taken place. A moment of weakness, of fear, and of surrender. A king realizing that power is not inherited but borrowed, and that even a monarch can lose control of his own story. Even as the truth burned within the palace, the real power struggle was only beginning. While the world saw Catherine as the serene Princess of Wales, insiders knew another truth, one forged in quiet strength and quiet rebellion. For months, she had been preparing for something larger, something even her husband didn't fully understand. Her rise wasn't sudden, nor was it accidental. It was deliberate, careful, and concealed beneath layers of grace. She had mastered the art of stillness, the ability to move without appearing to move at all. When others hesitated, she listened. When others spoke, she observed. And in the silence between power and perception, Catherine built her throne. Long before the world would call her Queen Regent, Catherine had already begun influencing decisions that mattered. Senior advisors would later admit that her counsel often shaped outcomes that bore the king's signature. She had learned that true power didn't require a crown, only the ability to steer those who wore it. Every document, every appointment, every whisper through the palace corridors had her fingerprint on it, not through defiance, but through subtle persuasion. To the untrained eye, she remained the dutiful wife, but to those who watched closely, she was becoming the monarchy's quiet strategist. Her mind was her greatest weapon. While others clung to tradition, Catherine reached beyond it. She began consulting with constitutional scholars under the guise of royal research, exploring precedents few dared to mention. Some say it was her conversations with the archbishop that truly cemented her understanding of duty and divine right, and how faith could anchor power when politics wavered. Through those discussions, she gained something far rarer than approval. She earned trust. The church saw in her a moral steadiness that reminded them of an era when the monarchy still commanded reverence. But Catherine's vision stretched further. Her relationship with the military quietly deepened. Generals and commanders found her calm, decisive, and unwavering under pressure. They called her the steady hand, the one who never panicked even in crisis. Slowly, the two great institutions that defined continuity, the church and the armed forces, began to see her not merely as the Princess of Wales, but as the embodiment of stability itself. She was, without declaration or ceremony, becoming the living symbol of order in a family defined by turmoil. Yet behind that poise, there was conflict. Late nights weighed on her. The struggle between duty and motherhood gnawed at her conscience. She knew that every step she took toward destiny carried a cost, the distance it created between herself and the life she once cherished. She wanted to be both mother and monarch, nurturer and navigator of a crumbling dynasty. But as the king's health faltered and the palace tightened around its secrets, Catherine began to understand that love and loyalty would soon stand on opposite sides of the same line. Outside those walls, the public saw her differently. To them, she was the unshakable pillar in an age of royal fatigue, a woman who carried the crown's weight without letting it crush her. Polls showed admiration rising even as the monarchy's reputation waned. People didn't just respect her, they needed her. Amid scandal, illness, and uncertainty, Catherine had become the stabilizer, the single thread keeping Britain's faith in the royal family intact. But stability comes at a price. Under calm gestures and perfect smiles, an old rivalry was beginning to smolder. Camilla, once the unchallenged queen, now found herself quietly sidelined, her influence fading with every sealed meeting Catherine attended. Behind closed doors, the tension was palpable. Smiles exchanged in public, silence exchanged in private. The two women represented opposite visions of power, one built on endurance, the other on entitlement, and only one would survive the coming storm. But as Catherine prepared for destiny, one woman watched in fury and vowed not to be erased. When the proclamation broke, Camilla's reaction wasn't silence, it was rage. For decades, she had fought to be accepted, crowned, and legitimized in the eyes of a nation that had never fully forgiven her past. She had endured years of whispers, cold glances, and quiet judgment, all to finally claim the title she believed she had earned. But now, with a single signature, her reign was reduced to a shadow. The ink on the king's emergency proclamation had barely dried when Clarence House erupted. The fury was instant, unrestrained, and deeply personal. Behind those walls, insiders whispered of raised voices, shattered decorum, and words that could never be taken back. To the staff who had served her faithfully, it was a moment they would never forget. Some heard the thud of a door slammed with finality. Others described tears, disbelief, and the haunting phrase she repeated again and again. After everything we sacrificed, those who had stood beside her through decades of scrutiny now found themselves torn between loyalty and logic. The crown had spoken, and in doing so had quietly pushed Camilla aside. For some, allegiance remained with the woman they had followed through scandal and ridicule. For others, the path forward was clear. Catherine was the new center of gravity, the face of a monarchy desperate to survive. The divide was instant. Inside the palace, subtle but unmistakable lines were drawn. Every glance, every whisper carried weight. Staff who had once worked seamlessly together now eyed each other with suspicion. Letters were recalled, communications restructured, and roles reassigned overnight. The monarchy's internal unity, always fragile, began to fracture under the weight of betrayal. And yet, Camilla's anger wasn't rooted merely in power. It was deeply personal. The proclamation wasn't just a constitutional maneuver. It was a personal repudiation, a reminder that even after decades by Charles's side, she would never truly belong to the monarchy's heart. When she confronted the king, the exchange was as raw as it was inevitable. Sources later described the moment as both heartbreaking and explosive. After everything we endured, she is said to have pleaded, "After everything we gave up, you do this?" But the king's silence spoke louder than any answer. Whether out of guilt, weakness, or duty, Charles had chosen the path he believed would preserve the monarchy. Camilla saw it differently as the ultimate betrayal from the man she had once believed would stand by her until the end. The crown, she realized, had claimed him again. Outside the palace, the war took on a life of its own. Media outlets seized on the fracture, transforming it into spectacle. Tabloids divided the nation into warring camps, Team Camilla versus Team Catherine. Each photograph, each royal engagement became ammunition in a silent battle for the public's favor. Commentators speculated endlessly. Was this a power transition or a quiet coup? While Catherine maintained her silence with unshakable composure, Camilla's absence from official appearances spoke volumes. The contrast between them became the story. One poised, one wounded, one ascendant, one fading. Even within the royal family, the strain grew unbearable. William's relationship with his father, already complicated by loyalty and expectation, grew cold. He stood firmly by Catherine, not as a husband protecting his wife, but as a future monarch defending stability. The father and son, once united by purpose, now spoke in formalities and brief exchanges. Every meeting was tense, every word measured, and as their rift widened, the institution's carefully crafted image began to unravel. The palace's communications office scrambled to contain the storm. Press statements were drafted, redrafted, and scrapped. Official photographs were delayed, public engagements postponed, but the damage had been done. The monarchy's polished facade was cracking, and no amount of control could disguise the truth. Power had shifted, and the old order was breaking. As the royal walls trembled under emotion, the nation demanded an answer. What had truly prompted this royal emergency?